So next up, we have Senator Katie Hester. So Senator Katie Fry Hester, representing the 9th District in the Maryland State Senate, sponsored the Maryland Online Data Privacy Act and the groundbreaking artificial intelligence, and the groundbreaking Artificial Intelligence Governance Act of 2024, one of the nation's strongest state laws ensuring responsible AI use in the government. She holds a degree in agricultural and biological engineering from Cornell University and serves as Deputy Majority Whip and Chair of the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology in the Maryland State Senate. So please help me welcome Senator Katie Fry Hester.
Oops. Hello, everyone. Now that we're all really, really scared, right? Some of us legislators are doing our best to try to be an antidote to some of the stuff that's out there. But anyways, it's a great opportunity to be here today. I want to thank Rolando and all the staff for organizing the conference. And I want to thank all of you for being here today, because we really need an interdisciplinary approach to working on this issue. And so it's great to have people here from the private sector, the public sector, the academia. Just a little bit about me. I am not a lawyer. I'm an ag bioengineer by training, and I now sit on our Energy, Environment, and Environment Committee. I chair our Joint Committee on Cyber, IT, and Biotech, and I also chair the Joint Committee on Fair Practices in State Personnel Oversight, which is going to be very interesting in the future with all the labor issues. But just a quick story about, you might wonder how somebody who's not a lawyer wound up being in the position that I am in it. And I just like to solve problems. I honestly just like to solve problems, and wound up running in 2017 because I disagreed with my current state senator on most of the issues that she represented, along with President Trump. But anyways, they weren't expecting me to win. You know, I was running against a 16-year incumbent, and so I was a freshman, and I walked into the president's office, the president of the Senate, and he said, "Senator." I was like, "Yes." He said, "What committee do you want to be on?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm an engineer. I'd love to be on this environmental committee. I also have done a lot of work for USAID on economic development. I'd love to be on the business committee, finance, and I got some friends on budget and tax. I'd love to be on that committee too." He said, "Okay, you're on judicial proceedings." I said, "I have no experience in criminal law whatsoever." He's like, "Give me a year." And I was like, "Okay," because that's what you say when you're a freshman. So I walked out, and he said, "Oh, and by the way, you're an engineer?" And I said, "Yes, I'm an engineer." He's like, "Well, we got this committee, the Joint Committee on Cyber, IT, and Biotech. How about you chair that?" And I said, "Okay." So the only thing I really knew anything about was biotech, but we did a quick gap analysis of where the state stood on cybersecurity, realized we were woefully behind, and then when the Department of Health got attacked during COVID, and we couldn't access any of our health department services, the cybersecurity part of my career really took off. And now we've just been assigned artificial intelligence, so that is what I am here to talk to you all about today. Let me just make sure my notes come up here. So in general, I just wanted to cover off three things. First, I think we've all heard about the enormous promise and the enormous risk that artificial intelligence poses the world. And in the absence of federal legislation to date on the topic, a number of states have tried to take steps forward to mitigate the problems that have arisen. I'm going to talk a little bit about, since I'm the only legislator here today, and I know you guys are dying to learn about how policy is made, I'll talk a little bit about the sausage, how the sausage is made, and then wind up with what the federal government is doing in terms of the 10-year ban on state AI regulation, which is equally threatening. So going on to the next slide here. I think this crowd probably knows this better than anybody, but there's enormous responsibility at a time of technological uncertainty. I think we've seen polls that show that people are really excited about AI, but the last poll I saw from Pew Research Center said that people are now a little bit more nervous than they are optimistic about what AI is going to mean for their lives. At the same time, we've just heard about the ability to cure brain diseases, which is amazing. And let me tell you, as I hit 50, I'm super excited about that memory bump that, that I want to get, because sometimes that short-term memory just isn't there. But seriously, I think that this technology is going to rival, electricity, nuclear power, and even the Industrial Revolution, these huge points in our time where we've seen the massive, massive change. But you think about in the Industrial Revolution, it did reduce poverty, but at the same time, it also caused the whole child labor issue. So that there's all these things that kind of come and go that you have to manage the blessings and the curse of these new technologies at the same time. There's also, like, just looking at it from the government perspective, right? There are a lot of different ways that the government can use, AI. It's often framed as a future issue, but we recently did a survey across all of our agencies to figure out, how and where and when we are using AI and how we would like to use it if we could afford to. And just a few examples from all over the country. California Department of Public Health is now using Gen AI with their human inspectors in report writing to speed up their process and make these huge efficiency gains we're hearing about. And in the government sector, in case you haven't learned or don't know, we're just always short-staffed. We're not worried about laying people off because we're always 10%, 11% underemployed. So the people that are left are working really, really hard. And so we love the efficiencies that can be gained. In Nevada, the Health Insurance Exchange is using virtual AI to answer more basic questions over the phone, which is freeing up those employees to focus on other things. In Denver, Colorado, they used AI in their new 311 system to address their multilingual population. They're now serving 72 languages in Denver, Colorado, which is absolutely amazing. And I mean, I could just go on and on. But at the same time, we've seen these efficiencies, we've seen these benefits. There's also, huge risks. And here are two instances where governments, one of the Netherlands, one of the state of Michigan, used AI with really devastating impacts for those people that were affected. So in both cases, the Netherlands and the state of Michigan sought to streamline their systems for the benefit of their constituents getting benefits through automation. And the goal was to reduce both their larger human-driven operations, but also to identify more fraud. The Michigan Unemployment Insurance Agency paraded their success. They said they were identifying 5 times as many fraud as without the AI system. Now, this could have been seen as a red flag, but it's, I think when you're using a new tool, it's really easy to see everything, like if it's a hammer, everything as a nail. And so basically what happened is these 5 times more instances of fraud, they weren't all real cases of fraud. They were being picked up by the algorithm for some other reason. The same thing happened in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, I think it was about 26,000 people that were impacted. In Michigan, it was closer to 34,000. And what they were seeing in the state of Michigan is that while in the end, after a lawsuit, people were paid $30,000 each for not getting their unemployment for several years, you can imagine not getting your unemployment and what kind of pain that would cause you while you're trying to, feed your family, pay your car loan, pay your rent. It just really impacted these people's lives. So that's why it's so important that government get this right. This slide here talks about these consequential decisions. And these 11 areas are kind of key areas where at a point in somebody's lives, there's a big decision that is made that changes the trajectory of that person's life. And so this was in reference, I think we pulled this graphic from Colorado, but their consumer protection law identifies 11 of these areas, which we call these consequential decisions, where it's really important that there is a human in the loop, as well as any artificial algorithms, to make sure that if something goes wrong, there is some oversight over it. And I mean, just a few examples of what can go wrong, in addition to what we've already heard about. In employment, there can be discrimination. I think Amazon had a case where it was screening out the women, so it was only hiring men, their AI tool was. New York City had a chatbot that was giving faulty legal advice, suggesting that landlords could discriminate based on income. There was that case a few years ago where there was that eating disorder chatbot, which was supposed to be supporting people. It was actually giving really bad advice to the people who were using it. And then in the justice system, just like we heard about how dialects can influence people or be discriminated, against or biased. There has been multiple cases of facial recognition. It just doesn't. There aren't as many black and brown faces in our repertoire of facial recognition, and so it's often wrong. And there was this case in Detroit where there was a woman who was 8 months pregnant, who was falsely arrested as a suspected carjacker because the AI facial recognition that the police were using said, yes, this is definitely that person. So you can see how in every single one of these consequences, there's real harm that can happen. So probably the biggest attempt to regulate artificial intelligence is the EU AI Act. And the thing that I really like about it is that it takes a risk-based approach. You can't treat everything the same. So you take those really high-risk areas, those areas of consequential decision, or the higher risk that are life and death issues, and you say those are the ones that have to have the strictest pieces of policy. It was first proposed in 2021 and is finally going into effect this year. And the goal really is a human-centered approach to systems that are overseen by people, that are safe, transparent, traceable, non-discriminatory, and hopefully environmentally friendly. So in the States, just like we don't have a national data privacy law, we also don't have a national AI law. And so most states have enacted or proposed legislation in very specific areas, usually in response to on-the-ground problems that they see. We are the closest to our constituents and the most nimble, compared to, we move faster than the federal government does. And so, and we all take, whether it's really not a partisan issue at the state level, we all feel very, very strongly that the protection of our constituents is our #1 priority. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, this year, 28 states plus the Virgin Islands passed over 75 AI-related pieces of legislation. And these examples are so very broad. They touch on different things with different levels of influence, but Utah has something that regulates these AI-driven mental health chatbots, so making sure that they actually do what they say that they're going to do. Maine put in a bill, and this was a couple of years ago, that protects its nurses in its hospitals from being fired because they chose to override the decision that a machine made. And so you think, well, why would anybody need that? Well, it's because somebody in Maine was fired for saying hey, I'm a nurse, I disagree with this machine is saying, and I'm going to follow my own best judgment to keep this person alive, and that person was let go. We have several states that have banned discriminatory hiring algorithms and mandating transparency in the hiring process. California has been very, very active in this space. It's passed bills that mandate transparency, content labeling, infrastructure risk, and most recently AI literacy in schools, which is something I continue to work on. Haven't been successful yet though. Colorado was the first state to pass a comprehensive AI risk bill. This requires developers and deployers to do risk assessments for consequential AI. Texas and New York both passed large bills this year. The Texas bill addresses AI used by state government. It prohibits biometric data taken without consent. It bans a behavior manipulation and deepfakes of children, and it protects against social scoring and censorship. So it's a really big bill that covers a wide range. The New York Act is similar to the Colorado bill, where it focuses really on those consequential decisions and makes sure that there is no kind of algorithmic discrimination and that there's a right for human redress when the AI is used to make some of those decisions. So what have we done in Maryland? This is the wonky sausage making part I promised to talk about. In the Senate, we have 5 standing committees, which you'll see up there. And in the House, we have, I thought it was 7, yeah, that is 7. And so basically, in order for a bill to become a law, it It has to get introduced on one side, make it through that committee, make it through the floor process, go over to the other house, make it through the committee that is assigned to, make it to the floor, and then be in the exact same position that it was when it passed, in the other chamber. And if they're not, then they often go to conference committee, and then both chambers have to vote on the conference committee. And so basically what I'm saying is it's actually really, really, really hard to get a bill passed even at the state level. I mean, that said, we do have about 2,500 to 3,000 bills introduced every year, ranging from like everything to really big stuff like AI to really small stuff like riding a golf cart on a road in Ocean City. But like because of the way we're set up, we have to handle all these things. But out of those like 2,500 bills that pass, that get introduced, probably only a third of them actually become a law. But what happens with AI is that they wind up in many different committees because AI is going to touch everything. So like, for example, the committee that I sit on, which covers education, energy, and the environment, we not only deal with AI in any of those spaces, but we also deal with AI in elections and government use, and of course, AI in education, which I already mentioned. The Finance Committee deals with business regulation. So any of these things that mandate disclosures and actions from developers and deployers would go through the Finance Committee. And the Judicial Proceedings Committee, which I served on thankfully for only 1 year, that would handle anything that has to do with criminal cases. They also do housing and rent issues, and anything that has to do with court operations. So I guess my point of this slide is, like, first of all, it's hard to pass a bill. Second of all, the average age in our legislature is probably about 70. And so we have to make sure that the people on each of those committees on both sides of the House and the Senate understand what they're actually talking about, or understand what is presented to them. So there you can see some of the bills and where they wound up this past year. So I'm going to talk about 4 bills, 2 that passed and 2 that didn't pass, and just give you an example of how hard we are working here in the state of Maryland to protect our consumers and to encourage productive innovation. Because I fundamentally believe that that this is an amazing opportunity that I would like our state government, our state, to reap the economic rewards of this, the health rewards. And that if we do not do this, we will be left behind. So, but I wanted to start with the state government first. I thought, we really can't ask the private sector to regulate themselves unless we make sure our own house is in order. And so what Senate Bill 818 did is it created the governor's artificial intelligence subcabinet, which is charged with developing and implementing an action plan for the state. It requires impact assessments of any piece of technology that we use that has AI that is in reference to a consequential decision. So if it's a fraud detection piece of software or cybersecurity stuff that's not making consequential decisions, is not determining whether or not you're going to get hired or whether or not you're going to get your benefits. And so that's how we're deciding what has to have an impact assessment. It also requires the state to track what it is, where it is using AI, so that we have a comprehensive list. And then the subcabinet has to produce a roadmap, which is due out in September, of how we are going to productively use AI in I think 11 different categories. So that bill passed. I think the secret to it passing was a strong collaboration between the governor's office, the Department of IT, and the legislature. We also were able to get funding to make sure that they could do the work set forth in the bill. This year, we tried the AI Consumer Protection Act, which did not pass. And this was modeled after the bills that I slightly described in terms of Colorado, Virginia, and Texas and New York. Basically, on the developer side, it requires that the developers use reasonable care to prevent discrimination or bias. It requires developers to disclose the AI system's capabilities and risks, and to provide documentation to the deployers to support the impact assessments. The deployers then have to maintain a risk management approach for the system while it's in use. They have to conduct impact assessments for the high-risk stuff. and notify the people who are using it when, in high-risk instances, when they are using the artificial intelligence, and allow, just like our data privacy law, for the consumer to have the right to correct and appeal their data, which is then used to make these decisions about them. In terms of enforcement, the Attorney General would oversee the enforcement, and consumers also had the right to sue, a private right of action for harms caused by the violation. Going into session, I knew it was going to be a battle with industry, and so I wasn't that worried that it didn't pass the first year. Oftentimes it takes 3 years to pass a bill. But we did have a good coalition, which included a number of unions, including the AFL-CIO, the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, Consumer Reports, the Veterans Chamber of Commerce, the Center for Democracy and Technology, and the Maryland Tech Council. We also had, the normal big tech groups all opposing the bill and probing at these kind of potential loopholes to poke holes in the bill, which were all over the place. The big one was trade secrets and how broadly these could be interpreted. But anyways, at the same time, we had competing bills in the House. So I had introduced this one bill in the Senate. We had 2 bills in the House. One of those bills was a study bill. And you could think that maybe having a work group to study this would be a good idea. Although I don't think that that work group would ever reach consensus. And in fact, I don't think that work group's ever going to meet. But we'll come back again next year and build a bigger, better, broader coalition. Going on to one that did pass, this one took 2 years. This has to do with non-consensual sexual imagery. So this is where you can take a picture of one person, upload it onto a site, like one called Undress Me with AI. They will then put that person's face on a nude body and make it either a static or a moving graphic of that person. I had this happen to a daughter of a parent in Howard County by a student in another county. That a young lady no longer goes to school here, and I think she probably left the state. But her profile online will follow her, forever. And so what we did in this bill, the Federal Take It Down Act may or may not help this by forcing the major platforms to pull this stuff down, but it still gets distributed, right? And so we made the act of creating synthetic media pornography equivalent to the act of taking a real pornography and using it in a revenge porn scenario where you're trying to get even with that person. This is one of the reasons why it took the bill 2 years to pass, because when it passed the House and the Senate last year, it passed in 2 different postures. In the Senate, the penalties were the same for pornography and synthetic media pornography, and in the House they were different. And so what the Women's Law Center was advising me is that if we allow 2 different standards, if the standard for the synthetic non-consensual sexual imagery is less than the standard for the real pornography, everybody's going to say that that's not real pornography, that's synthetically created pornography. And the only way to prove that is then to take pictures of the actual body, compare it to the real body, and say hey, these 2 bodies aren't the same, right? And that would further traumatize the victims. You guys with me? Okay, so I killed my own bill last year. We came back this year. We got it done in a way that the 2 are the same. And I will be going, and this fall, I'm really trying to reach out to all the school systems across the high schools across the state to let them know that this bill is now in place and that you shouldn't be playing around with sites called Undress Me with AI, because it's just not cool, and now it's illegal. Hold on, my screensaver just went off. Okay, so that one passed. And the last one I want to talk about is the Pikesville, the racist rant of the principal from Pikesville School. Have you guys heard about this one? So basically, in a nutshell, the Pikesville principal was accused was put on paid leave for saying, for audio suggesting that he made bigoted comments about Black and Jewish students. And he insisted, the principal insisted that he was a victim of a deepfake audio, but it took so long to prove that it really kind of ruined his life along the way. The story spread internationally, had millions of views, and the principal met with loads of abuse. From the county's perspective, they had to station police outside his house, so there's like a financial cost to the county to defending this person who may or may not be innocent. It did turn out that he was innocent. The deepfake audio was made with an AI tool that cost $5 a month, but it took law enforcement a full year and countless resources to figure out how it was done. It turns out it was a disgruntled employee at the school who did this to get even with him. When the state's attorney for that county contacted me, he had nothing really to prosecute this person with. He was originally held on school disruption, which carries a 6-month sentence, but that was it. He was later then, I think, taken to federal court. Was it pornography? On pornography charges. So because they had his computer and they were looking at this kind of racist rant and the generation of that, somehow they found this pornography. And when the feds come after you, then it's out of the state's hands. So basically what this bill would have done if it had passed, it would have taken our existing identity theft statute and it would have included deepfakes in that crime of identity theft. It would have offered a civil recourse for victims so that one individual can sue another individual, which is very important for speed because our attorney general is so backed up. And it strengthened the penalties, and it would have added on additional penalties to any other crimes that were made, and also enhanced the law enforcement's ability to investigate and prosecute. So you see there's 4 different bills covering 4 different topics. I imagine in the future the statute of the state of Maryland will be edited such that there's an AI kind of component to every single thing that we do. So I'm nearing the end here. Well, the end of the presentation, but not the end of the story. So given these challenges, there's a number of us who have worked together through the National Conference of State Legislators. And we started off with an NCSL group, which kind of morphed. We now call ourselves the Multi-State AI Policymaker Working Group. It's simply a group of about 200 state legislators from across 45 states, representing both Democrats and Republicans. And basically, we just share what we're doing. We're all struggling with the same thing. We're all trying to protect our constituents in the same ways, and we're really united by the kind of common principles that strong data privacy should be the foundation of good AI policy, that having some transparency is essential, that people should know when AI is making decisions about their lives, not humans, and that human oversight at some point in the process has to be there, especially in high stakes and critical systems. And so we've worked together for over 2 years now, both sharing what we're doing at the state level, but then also hearing from industry experts and nonprofit advocates. And I'd love to have the gentleman who went before me come talk to our group because he would really scare them. And we wrote a letter that was published in the Journal of Data Privacy, I think, which basically kind of said, hey, this is what we're planning to do. What's happening right now is in the big, beautiful bill in Washington, D.C., which is over 1,000 pages long, there's like a small clause that basically says states shall not regulate artificial intelligence in any way, shape, or form for 10 years. And so I've been beating the drum on this, going like, hey, I know Medicaid is a huge issue, and I'm really concerned about this, but nobody really knows that this other moratorium is in the big, beautiful bill. It says it prevents states from enacting any law that limits, restricts, or otherwise regulates AI tools involved in interstate commerce. And the definition of AI is very, very broad. And so some of us are wondering if it would even undo all of the data privacy legislation that we've currently done. Not to mention, other things, deepfakes, automotive, autonomous vehicles. What about the cybersecurity legislation that uses AI? Like all of these different things. It's not just, theoretical. And so we've been lobbying, and it's turning out that it's not really, it's turning into a bipartisan opposition to this in the budget bill. We're hopeful that it will get pulled out, but we're not as optimistic that it won't come back. We think it would probably, if it did come out, because of a parliamentary rule in the Senate called the Byrd Rule, which says it has to be directly related to the budget, it could get pulled out for that, and they would just avoid discussing the policy at all. Then it would come back in a bill that they would require the standard rules to pass. But like I said, this is probably the only thing I've ever agreed with Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene on. She said if she'd read the bill, which is her first mistake, if she'd read the bill and knew this was in there, she never would have voted on it. The Freedom Caucus is also now opposing it. I think every single Democratic legislator down there opposes it. There was a letter from state lawmakers. There was over 260 of us who signed that, who opposed it. And then there's also been multiple petitions covering millions of average consumers who say that they all oppose this. So fingers crossed, we should know very, very soon. So where does that leave us? I think it kind of leaves us where I started my presentation, which is that this technology has enormous opportunity and enormous risks. And in the absence of federal policy, the states have been stepping up for the past, 4 or 5 years. This proposed federal moratorium is absolutely insane, but there could be a silver lining. I mean, I really hope that we're able to establish a minimum federal baseline of instead of a cap, it would be a floor. Just saying like, hey, let's just standardize some of this protections for these huge risky things at the federal level, and then let states go above and beyond that where necessary. So I think, I'm just grateful that you are all here and that we've covered such a wide range of topics today. And if any of you are interested in getting involved in the legislative process in Annapolis, you know where to find me. My chief of staff, Bridget, is over there. She, until I get one of those things implanted in my head, she's the other half of my brain. So I really enjoyed you, and I would take a few questions.
Earlier, you mentioned one of the Texas bills passed something that prevented, well, it passed a lot of things, but it prevented something called social scoring. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? And afterwards, I remember you also mentioned you were a proponent of AI literacy in schools. Could you also elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, two very good questions. So social scoring, it's social profiling, right? So it's like saying, like in that Netherlands case, they said that anybody who didn't look like a Westerner or was below the poverty line was probably using UI fraud, something like that. So it's taking a bunch of other things about you, right, and using them to give you a score, such that using that score to make a decision. That's in a nutshell what that is, or how I interpret it in that bill. AI literacy, I think probably most of you would agree or have heard the quote that says, AI is not going to take your job. It's the person who knows how to use AI that will. And so I feel very, very strongly that we have to revise our career and technology standards for K through 12 in the state of Maryland. We probably also have to revise higher education. But I think we need to build in AI literacy to, as soon as we give a kid a device in a school, we have to make sure that they are AI literate, as one of the earlier speakers said. And we've had a bill a couple years in a row now, which hasn't passed. think this year is the year, third time's a charm, which basically requires MSDE to integrate AI into the core standards, the Maryland Common Core standards that all of the schools work off of. It requires that we provide our teachers with professional education on how to use these tools. And it requires the state to work in collaboration with the school districts to have guidance for AI in the classroom, AI in administration, and a few other things. Be happy to share those bills with you, and definitely making that my #1 priority bill for this year.
Thank you.
So I think that there's some potential traction for having laws, well, at least in Europe, for having laws sort of revisited every 2 years. And I wonder if that seems like a good idea. Is at the fast pace of technology, being able to pass AI legislation and then reevaluate how appropriate it is for the 2 years after, since maybe like 3 or 5 years ago, deepfakes weren't as good as they are now. So maybe there wasn't really any legislation or any pressure to do that. And so I was wondering if that's a good idea, and if there's even an infrastructure to be able to enforce it every 2 years. It seems like a logistical nightmare as well.
That's a great question. So first of all, we constantly update legislation. So anytime, like the Data Privacy Act we were just talking about, doing a tweak to that to include this neural data, that would be like once you pass the big bill, coming back to that small tweak would be hopefully relatively easy. Just from our perspective, we try not to regulate the technology. So we try to regulate either the harm or the benefit. And so with the revenge porn stuff, we're not saying you can't make a deepfake. We're saying that you can't make a deepfake that has the same impact as revenge pornography does without having the same consequence. And so I don't think that there's anything in there that's technology specific. It's about the harm.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned the prospect of within government, staffing being able to use some of the AI tools as a mechanism to help governance. And I know there's a recent survey that was put out by the International City County Management Association about local governments, and there's a wide gap between how governmental actors say they would like to use these AI tools and how they're actually using them. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how universities or other institutions might partner with governments to help sort of address those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see the copy of that survey. I know at the state level, we surveyed 70 principal departments and independent offices, and all 70 said that they were here and they wanted to be here. And the major barrier was funding and technical capacity and understanding the rules of the road. So we have a long ways to go and a huge appetite, just because there's so much efficiency to be gained. What was the second part of the question?
Just how other institutions.
Oh yes, so maybe you know this, but for our K through 12, we've been looking for a tool like a ChatGPT, right, where you could have access to all the information coming in, but not risk losing any sensitive data that was implemented going out. So actually, I think Morgan State has been working with UMBC, and one of the students there came up with a capstone project that basically creates this thing that protects that would be a safe way for K through 12 to use a tool like ChatGPT or something else. And so the state role there then would be trying to work with that university to scale it up and allow and either pay for it or get it for a reasonable cost into all the school systems, so they would all be able to use it for both their teachers and their kids.
Thank you for the talk. You made me think when you were talking about 2,000 laws a year that you have to look at, right? And when you're talking about bills that have thousands of pages, right? I'm thinking about senators, congressmen, congresswomen using AI to read those. And I'm concerned, right? because these AI tools are built by corporations, which are probably at the other side of the legislation, right? So, is there any conversation about limiting or like guiding the way that people like you, for example, use AI in their work?
I mean, I think probably that I have to use it, right, in order to become as good as possible. But there's also hallucinations and inaccuracies. So first of all, the 1,000-page bill was a congressional bill. I think the longest one I've read was the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which was started off as 180 pages and I think went just over 200 pages. But, you know, one of the things I wanted to say is that, like, I asked a friend of mine the other day, I was like, wouldn't it be great if there was like a course for legislators about how to use these AI tools? And because we had nothing. I mean, very little. And so I've been thinking about, like, I asked my friend, I said, well, could you spare like half an hour once a week, you know, over the summer to join us for something? Because we have very limited time. But I think the appetite is huge. And if anybody's interested in talking with me about some kind of, you know, doing a module for state legislators on how to actually use it in their offices, I mean, we would love to, but don't want to make big mistakes either.
Let's thank the Senate.